Today we have a beautiful game from Jose Raul Capablanca where he renders his opponent completely helpless. Watch his strategy as he imprisons one of his opponent's pieces into a situation where they just cannot escape. It's really quite an impressive display from the great Capablanca. His opponent is William Winter. This was played in 1919 at Hastings. Winter has white, Capablanca has black. Let us begin. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, and after knight C3, knight F6, we have the four knights opening. Named the four knights, of course, because the four knights are developed. It's fairly obvious. A common response after bishop to B5 from white is to play knight to D4. This creates sharp positions, but Capablanca likes to keep things in a more strategic vein, and he plays the symmetrical bishop to B4. Both sides castle, and white introduces an imbalance at this point by taking the knight on C6, and Capablanca retakes with the D-pawn. So black has the bishop pair. His pawn structure's been a little bit compromised, and at the moment, his pawn is undefended at E5. If white were to take, then rook to E8, the knight retreats, then you take on C3, and Capablanca would recover the pawn with an equal position. So in this position, white first plays D3, defending his own pawn and, of course, freeing his own bishop to develop. And here Capablanca plays a move that maybe seemed a little strange. It's bishop to D6. A more natural move might be knight to D7 to defend this pawn at D6. But in many of these lines, the bishop ends up at D6 anyway. And to be perfectly blunt, it's Capablanca, and he can kind of do what he wants anyway. It just seems to work out no matter what he does. So he moves that bishop a second time and defends the E5 pawn. Now, Capablanca would reveal with the white pieces that the better idea to play at this point is a move like H3. Not only does it control G4, he can play G4 himself and attack on the king side, but Winter plays bishop to G5, pinning the knight at F6. Capablanca asks a question of the bishop, what are you going to do? The bishop retreats to H4. And here, Capablanca plays a very profound move. He plays the move C5, which looks like it's just making this bishop at D6 into a pawn. But actually, he understands that keeping a total clamp on that D4 square is the key to his strategy, and we'll see in a minute why that is. He's also tempting Winter into his next move, and he does play the move knight to D5. Hitting this F6 knight looks like he's going to damage Capablanca's kingside pawn structure, but Capablanca said after the game, he said only a lack of experience could have accounted for this move. He said this, his opponent should have known that a player of his caliber would never have allowed such a move to be played if it weren't going to rebound on white. Now, that definitely, we see that kind of confidence in a lot of the top players. So in other words, just because you think Capablanca gave you an opportunity, he probably didn't. And he really does set white up. And here's what his response, G5, hitting that bishop. And by the way, if white wanted to sack, this is kind of a standard sacrificial idea. It doesn't work here because Capablanca would retake on D5. And now the queen is almost pinning the knight in a way. If ED5, then he would just take. Right? And if knight to F3, revealing an attack on the queen, the knight at D5 just retreats. And either way, Capablanca would win a piece. So there's no sacrifice on G5. The knight F6 check is played first, queen F6, and bishop to G3. So keep a very close eye on this bishop on G3. This is the key to Capablanca's strategy here, is dealing with that piece. Bishop to G4. Now he's the one pinning the knight on F3, and white does not have a good response to this move. He plays H3, and then Capablanca takes twice on F3. Now look at this bishop on G3. Capablanca has locked it up into an Alcatraz-style prison. With his next move, he forms these prison bars on E5, F6, G5, and H6. These pawns keep this bishop under lock and key. And his bishop will eventually emerge. It'll be like he's up a piece as the game unfolds. White just cannot get that bishop into action. There's just nothing he can do. First he plays king to G2. Capablanca begins to expand on the queen side. A4, try to limit that expansion. King to f7. He begins his king's march towards the center of the action. White's king cannot respond in kind. Rook to h1. So white is hoping to play h4 and maybe get some activity on the h-file. But Capablanca shows he is not worried about that at all. He doesn't even try to stop it. He plays king to e6, h4. Now rook f to b8. He wants to open up lines on the queen side by playing b5, probably c6 being played first. Hg5, hg5. And again, look at the bishop. There's nothing the bishop can do. It is completely imprisoned on g3. White plays b3. If he played a move like c4, that wouldn't change anything. After c6, b3, b5. This is a position similar to what occurs in the game. b3 is played first. Now c6. Capablanca prepares his break on the queen side, and white is helpless to stop it. Rook to a2. What white wants to do here is to double up on the a file, so after b5 he can take and then maybe capture the pawn at a5. Capablanca goes ahead with b5, and rook h to a1. Now, if you're not familiar with this kind of position, it would be a terrible move. I mean, a terrible move for Capablanca to play b4 here. Yes, he's gaining space, but he would completely lock up the queen side, and all of his play would completely disappear. So that would be a real strategic blunder. What Capablanca wants to do is open up lines, and you open up lines by exchanging pawns. So he plays the move c4, offering, there are a lot of different pawn exchange possibilities in this position. He's opening up those lines while the bishop stands on the sideline at g3, wishing it could be involved. ab5, cb3. Now, it would be a mistake for white to take on a5 here, because after rook takes, Capablanca would just play b2, and the pawn controls any square the rook could go to stop it, and the pawn is going to queen. There's nothing white could do about it in that case. So he goes ahead and retakes the pawn, and Capablanca plays rook takes b5. Here, white plays rook to a4. What he wants to do, what he's hoping to do, is to play d4 to loosen up this diagonal and get this g3 bishop activated. So Capablanca doesn't want that to happen, of course. So he could play c5 here. That would work. But he goes ahead and takes the pawn. He's not that worried about d4 at the moment. d4 is played, but now rook to b5. The best move probably was for white to take de5. However, after f takes, the prison isn't quite as strong, but it's still there. The bishop still can do nothing on g3. So white plays rook to c4, attacking the pawn at c6. Now rook to b4, offering the exchange of rooks, but if the rook takes on c6, he gets to take on d4, which is exactly what happens. Rook takes c6, rook takes d4, and now that d4 pawn is gone, the bishop at g3 can never escape. The prison is permanent, and there's no way he is getting out. And in fact, it's such a bad situation, white resigned in this position. He's basically down a whole piece and a pawn against Capablanca. A sample line, and this was given by Irving Cherniv in his great book on Capablanca's endgame play, is rook to c2, a4, rook c a2, and a3. And this bishop at d6 defends the pawn, and obviously it's over. One way black could make progress and actually queen the pawn here, if the king comes over, rook to b8, king over, then rook to b2 check, rook takes, pawn takes, rook to b1, and then this strong move, bishop to a3, fixes that pawn in place. And notice this rook keeps white's queen from getting over to do anything about the pawn. And after king to e3, rook to c4, basically setting up an advance to c8, king over, rook to c1, to c1, not c8. And that's it. Exchange will be forced, and then you retake with the queen. And that would be what would happen in the game. So that is why white went ahead and resigned, even though he was only down a pawn. The bishop was gone. A beautiful strategy from Capablanca to completely lock up that white bishop. Really amazing stuff. And I hope you enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.